Have you ever wanted to watch someone write code while they ramble in unnecessary detail about what they're writing? Well, look no further because that's what I'm about to do. I've been working on PowerTools for about 2 years now, so I figured it was time to change things up a bit and try to make a video about developing a plugin for Steam Decks. This isn't a tutorial, but it might have some useful tips and tricks on getting into plugin development. PowerTools is a plugin built on the Decky plugin loader framework. It adds more power settings to the quick access menu in SteamOS for all the tweakers in the community. This update was focused on adding a way to share settings profiles and adding additional profiles, which could be manually switched to. There were also plenty of other changes, but they only get more technical from here. So on to the nerdy stuff. You may have noticed this incredibly sped up screen capture as I'm talking. That's the footage of me programming and testing this update at somewhere around maybe 1,000 times actual speed. Trust me, you don't want to watch this at regular speed. Or maybe I don't want to rewatch it at regular speed. Maybe that. I can guess what you're thinking, and I can assure you the reason I don't want to rewatch it is not because I was using light mode, but you can still yell at me in the comments if you want. Anyway, in roughly chronological order, here's what's been worked on for this v2.0.0 release. First up was some bug fixing for issues discovered in v1.4.0, which is the last release. This included a fix for a pesky issue with the charge limit getting stuck at whatever you set it, even after you turned off the charge limit. I'm a bit embarrassed that slipped through, but I guess that's why they're called bugs. Speaking of bugs, there are some quite fun bugs that I found while developing PowerTools. I'll save that digression for a bit later though. After bug fixes, the harder work started. For a while now, there's been a special file called pt_oc.json, which could be used to override the limits of the various interfaces on the Steam Deck. The limits were important so that PowerTools didn't try to set invalid values, but sometimes people would change the valid ranges through overclocking or other UEFI modifications. And the Steam Deck doesn't always advertise those valid ranges it'll accept. Thankfully, the Steam Deck OLED is slightly better at that, and it seems like the LCD is slowly catching up. The problem with the special limits file was that it only worked with the Steam Deck. PowerTools can run on any Linux machine, so it does make sense to make the limits file also work with everything. In other words, a limited limits file is limiting, but an unlimited limits file is limitless. So I refactored the special file functionality to make it work with everything. To accomplish that, I created a new way to override limits on any PowerTools driver. That required a complete rewrite of the limits file layout, and I changed the file name to make it more obvious what it is for. Alongside that, I had to add limits override support to all of the PowerTool drivers, except for the Steam Deck one, since that already could do that. If you're already lost, that's okay. That change included more than 3,000 lines, and even I don't completely understand why I did anymore. With that refactor out of the way, I took a break from big changes for a while, and changed file formats for everything. PowerTools originally used JSON to save settings data, because it's easy to understand and very common for most people, so people would already know what it is. I wanted to try out RON, though, which is much less common, but easier to understand it and has less limitations than JSON, which meant I could fix some technical debt along the way. And fix I did. I only broke backwards compatibility with every existing save file in the process, but don't worry, this was only the first change that broke old save files, and the rest were much more necessary. While reducing that technical debt, I also added in a much more powerful change to the file format: settings variants. Now, each settings file can store multiple separate profiles for the same game, which allows for some greater configurability. At this point, this was only a capability in the Rust backend portion of PowerTools, and the UI couldn't do anything. I was trying to take a break from big changes, remember? That promise to myself lasted a whole 2 minutes, though. Around the same time, Ryzen Edge v2.0.0 was released. My framework 14 with an AMD Ryzen 7 processor was delivered, and Drokath submitted some code to improve Ryzen 7 6800U support. This created the perfect storm to work on improving the PowerTools settings driver for other AMD devices. I also slipped in some general improvements at the same time, where they made sense. PowerTools has had support for other AMD CPUs for quite a while now, but these changes just made it even better. With that, my attempt at a break was over, and I started work on adding the settings store. This was probably the largest change for the v2.0.0 update. I created a new server software to save and retrieve settings, as well as I added a whole web page to the plugin's UI to display those community-submitted settings. In true nerd fashion, though, I decided to try something a bit different for the server software setup. Usually this sort of large-scale storage would be best accomplished by putting it all in a database, but I didn't feel like doing that. Instead, I'm storing it all directly on an SSD. To make specific queries fast, I've made the server generate symlinks to data files in various places, so any query is just reading a specific folder. I'll admit, it's probably a horrible idea, but I want to try it out and see how the performance is. Running a full database to basically store some files seems a bit weird as well, and maybe a bit of a waste. And if you ignore all of the bugs that happened because I had to write a simple database from scratch, it's been going well so far. That community settings store was the last big change, but I spread it out while working on some other changes. To fix UI issues introduced by SteamOS updates, I started using Decky's newer global version. Hopefully that will actually permanently fix UI issues. Or maybe it won't. We'll see. To reduce the load on my local network, I improved caching for both of the online features, which access my home servers. I also made sure that PowerTools compiles with all the online features turned off, in case anyone actually uses that. Then I finally added settings variants into the UI. This involved making a new dropdown and sorting out communication to the backend for this, but it was a relatively quick change since the core functionality was already there by now. Integration tests led to some more involved bug fixes, but nothing too time heavy. I pulled off a couple of UI improvements during this time as well. First of those was changing the memory clock setting into a slider. Did you know that the OLED Steam Deck has 4 selectable memory clock speeds? The LCD version only has 2. Thanks to JDG Bolt for that tip. Oddly enough, the LCD memory clocks are buggier. The second UI change was implementing a default value for the PowerPlay tables wattages. Now they get set to 15 watts when they get activated instead of the max wattage for the respective fast or slow setting. While on this minor marathon, I threw in a few development utilities too, but I don't think most people will find those interesting, though this whole video is probably too technical for most people to find interesting. Anyway, I finished up the feature changes by making a basic UI for the community settings store, so that you can browse for the profiles of the game you're currently playing. It's not pretty, but I'm hoping that it'll inspire someone who's actually half decent at UI design to fix it, because there's no way I'm going to be able to improve it. That's the limit of my abilities already. So that's the end of my dev work. What's next? Well, I promised a rant about bugs, so that's what's next. I think I need a bit of a disclaimer before I get into this, though. These bugs are funny now, and they were actually pretty funny when I first encountered them too, but they were also a bit frustrating then. Bugs exist, no system is perfect, so this isn't a criticism of AMD or Valve or the community, just a fun poke in their direction. Probably the most famous or infamous bug is the SMT one. An issue with clearing caches of a core with simultaneous multithreading when only one of the logical threads went idle caused performance issues on the other logical thread. It took a while to figure out what was actually happening, but AMD did ultimately fix it. I know quite a few people used PowerTools to cover up that bug until the fix actually landed in SteamOS. That's pretty cool, but besides the point. What is the point, though, is it's actually absolutely crazy that AMD and Valve fixed this performance bug while hundreds, if not thousands, of Linux users experienced the performance problem and found a sort of funny workaround for it. In other words, a few very smart people found the cause of a low-level bug on a piece of silicon doing billions of things per second and fixed it. Meanwhile, the Linux gaming community figured out turning off some threads, specifically every second thread, also fixed it, and didn't reduce performance too much. Two solutions, both the best solution with the tools available, one brilliant, one pretty silly. A bit higher level, the AMD GPU Linux kernel driver is generally pretty stable. Last time I used Windows, AMD had more of a reputation of instability, while NVIDIA was considered more stable. On Linux, it's a bit of the opposite, since NVIDIA can't play nice with others. Maybe they never passed kindergarten or something. So it really surprised me when my Steam Deck completely froze one day. I was just running development versions of PowerTools to test out some new features which were using the AMD GPU driver. After like 5 more crashes, I managed to track down why it was freezing. But when I say freezing, I don't mean anything fun like a kernel panic or just the UI becoming unresponsive. The remote terminal, like, SSH, I was using would stop responding and my deck would eventually reboot. Zero explanation. Turns out, a specific interface in the AMD GPU driver was very, very particular about getting a page return at the end of the input. I had a good laugh about that one when I found out. For the less nerdy folks, let me explain. PowerTools broke the Linux kernel by not having an enter key at the end. It sounds a bit ridiculous. Thankfully, that can't happen anymore. That bug actually has been fixed. Unfortunately, there is still an AMD GPU bug that hasn't been fixed, but it might actually be a firmware problem, and it looks like they're making some progress on fixing it. On the LCD Steam Deck, there's another interface that doesn't behave properly. This is the memory clock interface. When you read from this file, it should tell you the available frequencies and what frequency is currently selected with the asterisk. When you write to this file, with one of the numbers on the left there, it should update the currently selected frequency to the frequency associated with that number. You should also be able to write multiple of those numbers, and the computer will select between those frequencies. Now, should is doing a lot of work in those sentences, since none of what I said is actually true. The Linux documentation agrees with me, but the LCD Steam Deck does not. No matter what is written to that file, what is read is always exactly the same. Checking some other stats does confirm that it's setting the memory frequency, at least. Except not the frequency value that you would expect. Turns out that 1 corresponds to 400 MHz and 0 to 800 MHz. To make it weirder, if 1 is written, even with 0 alongside, the memory clock gets locked to 400 MHz. It's just so strange. It's the complete opposite of what is being told to you. Just why is this the case? I don't understand. Around half of the quirks in PowerTools v2.0.0 right now are to accommodate this. These bugs keep me up at night. Not because they bother me so much that I can't sleep, but because it's actually sort of hard to write workarounds and fixes for these when I'm laughing about them. I'm actually thankful that I live alone, because this would probably make other people think I'm crazy, and I'm definitely not that sort of crazy. But I am here talking to a screen though, so maybe I am that sort of crazy? So what's next for PowerTools? The next feature update will likely be version 2.1.0, which will include some new things that didn't quite make it into v2.0.0. The documentation is also sort of out of date, so that's overdue for a rewrite before the next plugin update. Now that settings variants are implemented, I've had a few requests to make it possible to switch between them automatically with certain events. I think people just want to have a docked mode profile and a particle mode profile like the Nintendo Switch. I'm not against it, though I do think it's a bit unnecessary to use more power when a lower power config was already good enough. So we'll see if someone adds that or if I decide to do it myself. I think that's it. How are we doing on the super speed coding in the background? Almost done, I'd guess. It's really cool how that works. It's almost like I can speed it up to match with the exact length of time that I've been talking or something. I wonder if anyone liked any of the songs I played during my coding binges. Comment wherever if you did, but definitely don't comment below if you didn't. I think that's how YouTube works, right? Yes, definitely. PowerTools v2.0.0 is out now. Go try it out, see what you think. The merge window for v2.1 has just started, and I'm not exactly sure when it'll be ready to release. 2.0 was a major update with lots of changes, and I've been working on this project for 2 years now in my spare time. So for now, I'm going to take a short break. See you in a few months, or years, or decades, or millennia. Probably not millennia. I don't think I can live that long. You want to see a really innocent seeming script? So this is just a random browser program that I wrote to set the power LED of my Steam Deck. I was trying to make it go through all the colors, except for I discovered that if you write to the embedded controller too quickly, it doesn't really like that. Let me run the script. Very seriously, does really not like this. It actually just completely shut off. It's not like a kernel freeze or anything, because if I press the power button right now, it immediately turns on as though it just hard cut the power